gaan. Het staat garagewater voor jou. Waar hun vermogen hier gaan staan. Nou, u kunt wel plaatsnemen.
Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Janek Kretschmer will defend the academic thesis, Effective Giving Behaviour, How Pledges, Fairness and Information Influence Charity Choices. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you. Dear committee, family, friends, colleagues, being here in person and on the live stream. Thank you so much for making the time and traveling so far to be here with me today. I really appreciate this. And now I will motivate my research and summarize the key findings. In 2023, charitable donations for the first time reached more than $500 billion in the US. This is 2% of the US GDP, and it is 2 times the amount that the whole OECD together disperse as development aid. A very significant number. And 2/3 of this tremendous amount comes from individuals. Individuals like you and me, and it is exactly the behavior of these US donors that I study in my dissertation. Importantly, I'm looking into what motivates them to choose the charities that they are donating to. And I want to know what is the role of cost effectiveness if they choose. Cost effectiveness, in simple terms, is the logic of looking into the outcome that a charity can deliver to the recipients, but considering the input that the donor has to make with their donation. If we now check all the different causes that charity could serve, we will see that the logic of cost effectiveness does not apply for every cause. If we think about human rights, arts, culture, religion, input-output, this logic doesn't really follow here. But other causes, results can quantified quite easily, and it is straightforward to do so. If we think about health, well, how many people could be saved from blindness? How many avoidable deaths could be avoided? And how much CO2 could be prevented from reaching the atmosphere? Cost effectiveness can be quantified, and it would be sensible to look into it. And even better, nowadays, more than ever, we know what interventions work best. We look back at an extremely successful decade of evaluating charitable interventions, and research finds something astonishing. The top charities can do 100 times more than the average charity. If we now think that somebody really cares about any development goals in sub-Saharan Africa, and they would choose a charity at random, charity C, well, that would be the impact. If they would switch their behavior to sending cash directly to poor individuals in that region, the impact would already be 10 times bigger. If they would more straightforwardly just look at what science recommends as a top intervention, the impact would be 100 times bigger. So now the question is, why are so few donors following this approach for donating, even if they would give to this kind of causes? That is the comparison we are making. If you care about development, why not following a scientific approach? Well, for 2 obvious reasons. Either the donor simply doesn't want to. They care about other things. For example, how they feel about donating. Or they care about the personal connection. On the other hand, it could also be that the donor simply does not know. They don't know what charities are the best, how big the differences are, or to interpret the numbers correctly. In my dissertation, I will look into both explanations, starting with fairness. There might be a trade-off between giving to the most effective intervention and being fair towards all the charities. In an experiment, we create a very simple, straightforward trade-off. People are presented with two different charities. They serve the same cause. They try to help the same people. One charity is at the average. The other charity is in the top of the effectiveness distribution. So, how should people behave? Should they give everything to the top charity or should they split 50-50? Here's what we observe. Like, you see the percentage that either gives everything to one charity or gives to both, splits 50-50 in the middle, or on the very right, gives everything to the most effective charity. First we see most people want to give to both charities. More specifically, we find two patterns. Either people give exactly the same amount to both charities. I want to call them fairness donor, or they give everything to the more effective charity. I would like to call them impact donor. But the question is, how do we know that this is actually the motivation behind this behavior? And we ask them directly. They should just explain their own behavior. And what we find is, those people who gave 50-50, they say, almost in every case, well, I do this for fairness. The answers I read are like, both charities are deserving, I want to be fair. On the other hand, those people who give only to one charity, they would never argue with fairness. Yeah, because it doesn't match their behavior. They say, I like the one charity better than the other, or they say, I want it to be as effective as possible. So the conclusion is, fairness matters to many donors. For many people, being pro-social, giving to charity, and being fair goes hand in hand. But does that mean that those charities who can offer the highest effectiveness can do nothing to attract more donors? No, actually, there is something that they can do. They could communicate effectiveness in the best possible manner. That is the channel of the donor's knowledge. Enhance knowledge by being clear about what you can deliver. We could think about 3 different methods how a charity can communicate. Either you simply tell donors that evaluators think that you are in the top. Or you could go one step further and add just one more sentence saying, I can save a life for $5,000. This is why I'm in the top. $5,000 for a life. Actually, a great price. Or you say, well, I'm in the top, and that means I can do 100 times more than the average charity. And now we want to know, what do donors like better? And what we see is that if you consider only the verbal clue, this is a top charity, donations go up by 10% comparing to a situation where nothing is communicated about effectiveness. But if you add the sentence that means saving a life for $5,000, the effect goes down. A bit surprising. If you say, well, that means this charity can do 100 times as much as the average, that is the best result. And now again we ask ourselves, why would that be the case? And the answer lies in what donors expect. We asked them in the beginning of the experiment, what do you think? How much would it cost one of the most effective charities to save a life? And here's the funny answer that they give. Most people think, everything on the left of the red line, most people think $250 or less. Highly unrealistic. And it gets even better. A lot of people think, well, $10, maybe even less than $5. So less than a Starbucks coffee. Well, this is a pretty high expectation about what a charity can do with their money, because the real numbers are on the other side of the distribution. Here, highlighted with the dark bar. You see, it is really about 5,000, and only few people anticipate that. On the other hand, if you ask people, what do you think is the difference between the average charity and the top charity. People have very modest beliefs. They think, well, 4 times more, that's what most people think. Some people think even less. Only very few people know that it would be 100 times. So if they hear from the charity that this one could do 100 times more, people are like, wow, this is good news. And that works. And that explains why their donations go up the most. But communicating well is one thing, but it is worth nothing if you don't have people's attention. So in the final study, we think about how to make donors absorb information in a better way. And what we figure is pledge first, think later. I'm gonna explain what that means. So a giving pledge is an established method in fundraising. Pledging means the donor is promising today and delivers donations tomorrow. There's a gap between announcing the amount and delivering the donation. And a lot of meta charities help donors to register their pledge and to keep track. And there's a lot of time in between where something might happen. And studies already show that this boosts generosity because promising is easy and joyful, but what about people's charity choice? Is there maybe something we can exploit? Is there maybe the opportunity to make giving more easy for donors and to let them focus on cost effectiveness? So again, we have an experiment, very simple, 2 charities compared left to right, one with average effectiveness, one with top effectiveness, but we split donors in 2 different groups. Either they have to decide on the spot, or first they decide how much they want to donate, and a week later they just focus on which charity to donate. And if they can focus just on the charity, don't bother the amount that they want to donate because that's already decided. We see the following. We see if they pledge, generosity goes up. But the question is, what happens to the 2 charities? Well, for the average charities, nothing changes. They receive the same amount. But that means the top charity will receive all the additional donations, and that also implies that the proportion of effective donations go up significantly. Our idea is, well, that is due to additional attention because they are prepared after pledging. It gives them time to think. And the data is supporting this notion. Here, with the right bar, we see that people who pledge can recall the effectiveness information we provide more often, and they more often identify the more cost-effective charity. And that might explain higher decision quality. So to summarize, what we see is donors really care about fairness. It goes hand in hand with every pro-social behavior. We also see that the best way of communicating cost effectiveness is to highlight the relative differences, because that is good news, that is something impressive to the donor. And if you want to get their attention, start with a pledge, let donors think a little bit, approach them again, deliver your message, avoid impulsive giving. But don't worry, since donors are so extremely fair, no one will be left behind. Thanks for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you for your presentation. So the opposition will be opened by the chair of the assessment committee. That's Professor Peter Werner, and he is Professor of Behavioral Economics and Policy Design.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Janek, I would like to congratulate you to your thesis. So you address very interesting research questions, and these questions are not only scientifically relevant, but they also have a lot of practical implications for how charities are designed. You present detailed analysis, and it was a pleasure to read your thesis. And I would like to ask a question regarding Chapter 4 on the pledges. you conducted your study with a specific sample of participants, namely active donors. So these are persons who already give money for charitable purposes, and you find that pledges are effective, as you just described. So my question is, first of all, why did you select this group of subject as an experimental population? And how would your results be affected, in your opinion, if you would also have included participants who are not active donors? Mm-hmm. So would they also be responsive to the pledge?
Yeah.
What is your estimate?
Yeah, highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your question. As you say, our research should also try to serve a practical purpose. And I'm holding the belief that if you work with the people who donate the most, then studying their behavior and learning about what could change their behavior or what would be relevant for them to make their decisions would be the most relevant for the industry, like for the charities, and have real-life implications, and also academically be more relevant because it matches the group of people who deploy the behavior. And then more precisely, that interacts with how the pledge as an intervention would work. And I already conclude from your question that you think in the same way. And yes, first of all, what we see is that the success of the pledge study, that generosity goes up and perhaps charity choices change, lies in the fact that people take their pledge seriously. If they promise, they deliver. 87% of the donors in my study deliver the pledge. In reality, that might be less. Reality, if you would work with a standard pool of subjects. So definitely it is something that the finding relies on. But then again, if we think about our behavior in the, let's say, economy outside the lab, who would pledge? Well, people who want to donate, right? Like it would be a bit artificial to have a super cold approach to people who never donated before to make them pledges and just see that they don't fulfill the pledges. I don't think that fundraisers would work that way. They have the warm list that they approach for pledges. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Sarah Kinsbergen, who's a Professor of Sustainable Development at Maastricht University.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I join my colleague by congratulating you with this great academic milestone. It was a true professional pleasure for me to read and also to assess your PhD thesis, your dissertation, as the topic of effective giving is fascinating me already for quite a number of years, and especially when it concerns that field of international development. And I think, like the proponents of effective giving, I'm convinced that we face very complex global challenges, and that really requires us to very carefully consider how to best address them, and to then also very carefully consider how to invest the financial resources we have. However, my ideas on how to achieve, how to tackle these global challenges, what is the best way to do, differs somehow from how the effective giving school of people go about it. Overall, when I look at the approach of effective giving, I see a risk for a disconnect between the somewhat unpredictable, harsh realities on the ground, especially in developing countries, on the one hand, and then somehow the laboratory approach of effective giving. So I see a bit of a disconnect there. And from your thesis, I can see that you strongly believe in the principles of effective giving, and that you also somehow aim to broaden the circle of donors and organizations that work along these principles of effective giving. But today I really want to challenge that conviction. And I would like to ask you to reflect critically on the downsides of the approach of effective giving. And that might be a challenge somehow, because I see you have that strong belief there. So I invite you to really, really go beyond your convictions, and to also go beyond a few critical notes you've included in your thesis. So go beyond the critical notes you've included there. So I ask you, imagine you succeed in your endeavor, and that everyone would give according to the principles of effective giving. What would be the unintended negative consequences of this for the world?
Thank you.
I could nudge you there, but I'll leave it there with an open.
Yeah, let's see. Thank you. First of all, thank you for this question, highly esteemed opponent. First, I want to clarify, because at one point you were asking about effective giving, and in the end you were asking about effective altruism and the underlying principles. So which of the two concepts should steer the answer to your question?
For here, I'm talking about effective giving.
Okay. Effective giving, well, it doesn't necessarily come with strong political beliefs or philosophical beliefs. It more comes with an appreciation of research, of science, of using information that is out there in a sensible manner, and to reflect whether you could use research to get where you want to go faster. For example, if you really care about a certain quantifiable outcome, looking into research that would tell you what is the best way to achieve that goal, I don't see a strong downside in that, without saying that research would come with a downside. But maybe also research comes with a downside. There is also bias in research, and of course we all agree that we would try to avoid these kind of biases. But if we zoom out from the marginal effect and think about what would happen if research is even unbiased, and now everybody gives effectively, in the short run it might create some injustice or a problem of fairness. Again, depends on what your fairness view is, but if you look at the immediate outcomes, it might be unfair not to give those people who need aid but cannot receive it in a very effective manner. It would discriminate them. They have no chance right now. But what would happen in the long run? I guess that if all the donations go to the most effective interventions, like certain problems would be solved quite quickly. For example, in the past it was possible to eradicate smallpox. They don't consume any attention and resources anymore, and society was able to focus on new challenges. And I hope that if we could eradicate other causes that cause a lot of damage, could be prevented easily, will free up more research and also more resources for tackling more difficult challenges in the future, and then everybody would help in the long run. Does it answer your question?
Somehow.
I will try to make it around, and then you can ask again.
Okay.
Are you satisfied?
Yeah, I do think that I can hear from your answer to my question that you take up somehow a clinical approach to the reality. We're talking about the real reality, about real world problems, about real organizations. So I wonder, for example, when you look at the field of international development, we are currently working hard on a process of decolonization, on a process of shifting power. And I feel that the agenda you're presenting here runs a real risk of being very top-down, very colonial, very Western-based, based on Western types of knowledge and convictions. And that is kind of brought to countries in the global south, and that it has risks in itself to be very top-down and neo-colonial, and at the same time also runs the risk of being very exclusive towards which organizations are able to bring up the data that is, for example, needed to convince donors that want to donate through effective giving principles. And that I consider a risk in the here and now. So in that sense, the agenda could be considered as a drawback instead of a progress.
Yeah, let me extend then to these aspects a bit more. A common criticism could also be that allocating resources based on what for now is considered the scientific standard would be not democratic. It has no political legitimacy to do that. Like, in that sense, charity itself is a very privatized concept. And of course, that can also come with all the problems that privatization would offer. So we rely on the people who have the money to decide where it goes. If this is something you feel uncomfortable with, I can totally understand that democratizing the sector of charity would solve that issue, but would also be infeasible in itself. And about the underlying approach, the methodology, how to apply research to inform decisions. You say top down and not bottom up. Well, if there is strong scientific evidence that there are other approaches to improve outcomes on a per dollar basis, I would immediately agree with you that they should be considered, but it could be that I simply don't know this kind of research that would propose changes in the behavior. But if I could see that, I would agree.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'd like to move forward with the opposition. The discussion can be continued, of course, later. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Jan Schmidt, who's also at Radboud University of Financial Economics.
Yeah, yeah, candidate dear Janek, it was a pleasure reading this thesis. It's really well written, touches on research that is very much connected to what I do myself and like to do, and it has a lot of, relevant to the scientific community, but also in practice, of course, charities can learn a great deal. However, I'm here to be some opposition, so I have to ask you and challenge you on the fairness aspect that you would, forward very strongly. And you also say in your presentation, people say in the survey that both charities are deserving. But how do you exactly know that it is fairness and not some concept of complementarity of these causes? Because what you have one deworming charity, one is for food. So you could also say, once I dewormed these kids, then they can go to school, but then they need some food, right? So it could be well seen as a complement for charities. And if you think this fairness concept through, what would happen, right? If you give them 3 charities, 4 charities, 5 charities, would people then split? So I would like to ask you, how could you maybe have designed this experiment a little bit differently, or what could you add to exactly nail down this fairness point?
Yeah, highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for that question. I couldn't agree more with your criticism. Actually, things are even worse than you think, or that you insinuate right now, because another question could be, how do I even know that it is really about fairness? Because people first donate, and then they are asked to justify their decision, right? I mean, I say explain, but they could feel like, oh yeah, now I have to explain myself. I want to be consistent, so after I did something, I have to come up with an explanation. Well, fairness sounds right? So that is another weakness of the current design, and we're working on it. This week, we aim to collect more data to address both these concerns. So one thing is that we broaden the scope of different interventions. We aim to replicate this distribution of charity choices also over different causes, not only education, but also climate charities, water charities, and an additional health intervention. If all these different causes would show that people tend to split 50-50 in many cases, that would really increase the confidence in the result. And on top of that, we also elicit their fairness preferences in a more general way, independent of the donation decision. And we expect to see that those people who split 50-50 between both charities have a lower inclination towards efficiency and are more egalitarian in general, which would also boost my confidence into the results, and I hope yours too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Then the opposition will be continued by the member of the assessment committee, Dr. Piran Zhao, who's associate professor here in Maastricht.
Dear candidate, dear Janek, also congratulations from me. It's very interesting thesis. I enjoyed reading it and also learned a lot from it about the literature on the charitable giving and effective donations. That's not my research, but I think it's quite interesting and promising. And my question is also about chapter 4, where you find that adding a pledge increased the amount of donation to the effective charity. And you also claim that the mechanism is the choice simplification, and also because of that, attention was paid to the information about effectiveness. And my question consists of two interrelated aspects. The first aspect is that to test this mechanism of choice simplification, you conducted additional treatments, for instance, the separate decision and social planner. But I noticed that in figure 4 on page 124, there is no treatment, no significant treatment effect from separate decision treatment. But you still claim on page 123 that these results demonstrate a consistent pattern, suggesting that simplifying the donation process into two distinct decisions leads to changes in charity choice. Yeah. But if this is the case, shouldn't we expect that the separate decision also leads to significant treatment effect? And is that because maybe the sample size is too small in that group?
I know you're doing my job already.
But then what justified your choice of sample size across different treatments, right? And then the second aspect is also related to this, because you also use the result from the recall to justify that this is because, I mean, simplifying choices make people pay more attention to the information. But then I would challenge you on interpreting the recall result as attention, because it could be that people pay the same attention and they remember equally well in all treatments, including control, but then maybe in the control condition they wanted to justify their choice by reporting a higher effectiveness instead of misremembering or didn't pay attention.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, thanks for that question, highly esteemed opponent. Yeah, there are a lot of aspects in the question. I try to go in a chronological order. There is a question how to interpret statistical findings in general. And if a result is not significant, well, we should first of all abstain from putting a lot of emphasis and interpretation into that finding. But if a result shows in the same direction but is not significant, it for sure does not provide evidence in the opposite direction. So if we just say, well, all the findings are consistent with the proposed mechanism, I think you could justify that. Justifying the sample size is another question. Well, the pledge group is the main fact of interest, and financial resources in experimental economics are scarce, so you will understand that if the budget is fixed, I had to put more emphasis on the main groups of interest. So that was my rationale behind the sample size. Finally, you question the measurement of attention by just recalling information presented. And now you're providing a notion that I haven't thought of myself, saying that, well, as I already said, like, it might be that people want to be consistent and they gave fairly, and now they are again suffering cognitive dissonance, thinking like, well, now I'm saying I'm fair, but at the next stage I have to argue what charity is more effective. Well, there's again a conflict, and I agree with you, that might slant the answer to that question. And I also find some evidence that would show the following, that people who can recall the cost effectiveness correctly, but who gave fairly, are less likely to conclude from that information that they have at their fingertips and remember to conclude that the one charity was more effective than the other. This is exactly where I observe this cognitive dissonance. So people do remember the information, maybe even remember better if they pledged, but you see that the people who give fairly have a self-motivated belief not to agree to the notion that then one charity was more cost-effective than the other. So yeah, I think that is a problem that deserves more attention. Thanks for bringing it to my attention now.
Thank you.
Thank you. The proposition will now be continued by Dr. Thomas Post, Associate Professor also here at Maastricht University.
Dear candidate, dear Janek. So it was a pleasure to read your thesis. I like it for at least 3 reasons. One being that the topic has societal relevance. And the other one's more academic. Academic in a sense, the way you write, it's really sharp and straight to the point. I think there was not a single moment where I had to flip the page back and to say, well, how was this or that again defined? How does the design look? And also because most of the, if not all of the chapters have this consensus creation frame, which is a very difficult frame in writing, but a very successful frame. Now, to my question, it's we come back to fairness so again, and to this 50-50 split in the donations. Maybe you get some inspiration for the study you're running now. I think about that because me reminded the 50-50 split on research I did myself on subjective expectations. So when we ask people, what do you think? What's the chances you're getting age 70 or more? Then we see usually a distribution and a big clustering at 50%, which many people interpret as, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Now, seeing how you presented the effectiveness information in that chapter, but also in the other one, it's quite often numerical. We also know that people have troubles with large numbers versus small numbers. So my feeling was exactly the way you presented the effectiveness information makes it hard to process that for the average participant. And maybe therefore we see this 50-50 response, which then, you said it already yourself, so I don't have to make it up, might have been ex post rationalized in the verbal statements. Mm-hmm. So what do you think? What could it be that this is a response for representing I don't know? And how could we test for that?
Yeah, now, highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your question. I think the emphasis of your question is not with the explanation, but with the occurrence of the behavior in the first place. Why would you give 50-50? Well, and now I see why you connected with the explanation, because you're also doubting the explanation to some extent. But in the first place, I give 50-50 because I don't want to think too much like the 50-50, that's a rule of thumb, right? That makes also my whole thinking easier. 50-50 sounds right to me. Well, I'm also concerned about that, and I want to address it also in the study that goes live this week. And one way of doing this is to really measure whether people who give 50-50 have the same intensity of the distribution preference. Do they value their decision to the same amount people value their decision who gave straightforwardly to one charity only? Or would they be more inclined to say like, well, it doesn't matter how my decision is implemented. I would not pay anything to make the propensity higher that my decision is implemented. I would also respond in a questionnaire less enthusiastic about making this kind of decision. All these kind of thoughts I want to address in the upcoming study. And one more notion, you could also argue it's a way of hedging risk. Right? If you think about maybe one of the charities is fake or not as effective as claimed, if I kind of diversify over both charities, yeah, that is a way how to deal with risk. But what I find already is that this kind of behavior shows zero correlation with people's risk aversion. And in the future, I also want to check whether they think that one charity is more risky than another, than to have more evidence to refute the notion of hedging. Explain that behavior. Does that answer your question?
It does. And just a quick follow-up. Did you didn't measure numeracy so far? Think about it.
Okay, I do.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by the first member of the external committee, Dr. Tobias Ruhl.
Dear candidate, thanks a lot for this very specific and an insightful piece of work. And following up on what Thomas said in terms of giving a compliment, the reason why I really liked it, because on every single page I started to have mind fireworks on what you're writing, and really thinking about how does this affect us, and also who does that actually apply to. And in this regard, I want to also pose my question, focusing on chapter 4. What I really like is the idea of showing that pledging actually supports in creating more donation. Now, it's a question itself whether you want to achieve that, right? but assuming, also following your logic, that pledging helps in raising more money. And arguing along your lines, right, that this is supported by simplifying the choice. Now, reading through the chapter, what I started thinking about is, who does that actually apply to? And I found that you give this answer yourself on page 121, where you say that pledging does not increase the amount people donate, but it adds additional people who otherwise wouldn't have donated. And you even give it a numerical effect size, where you show that 50% roundabout, 49, would have donated anyway. Then there comes an additional 10 percentage points on top, right? So around about 20% of those who donated. And then there's 40% who don't donate at all. So in other words, your effect of simplifying the choice through pledging affects 10% of your sample, while 90% of your sample are not affected. So my question is, why did you focus on those 10%? And does the simplification of choice not affect the 90% at all?
Esteemed opponent, thanks for your question. I'm afraid it is even a bit more complicated than you suggest, because more than one mechanism is at work. You are referring to the mechanism that increases generosity, the whole money that goes into the charitable bucket, where you say it is really on the extensive margin and not the intensive margin. But I'm not proposing that that channel, which is actually driven by the joy of giving, coming from the pledge, are experiencing warm glow 2 times when you promise and when you donate, that motivates more people to give, is not the same channel that would explain why the choice of the charity differs. That channel is attention. The other channel is the joy of giving. But then your question stands. There is a big, and we see that also in the other study, where people do not pledge, that there are a lot of people who would give to the most effective charity anyhow. There are a lot of people who would split 50-50 anyhow, because they have very, very strong preferences that you cannot change and that are not explained by attention. So, well, in general, I don't want to change people's preferences. That's not my job doing empirical research in economics. But you could try to enhance decision quality. And actually, I feel somewhat relieved that maybe it is only a smaller percentage margin of people who might have just overread the information and can improve their decision and actually fulfill their own preferences by now spending the attention they need to find all the information they want to read about.
So if you allow me a follow-up. So we can argue what the channel is, right? But if I look at the mere numbers, what I see is that only 10% switch the behavior through whatever mechanism you're trying to decipher, right? So my question is, whether it's understanding, attention, whether it's engagement, in the end simplification, right? It's only 10% that changed their behavior. So in simple words, right, or as a simple question, do you assume, or is that your understanding, that 90% are not affected by be it whatever mechanism you find, and you're only finding this mechanism for 10%?
I feel comfortable assuming that 90% of the people kind of make the decision that they really want to make according to their preferences, and only 10% would, in hindsight, think, oh, that information slipped my mind and I want to revise. Now it also sounds to me a little bit like 10%, is this economically significant, which is, of course, something else than being statistically significant. Not everything that is statistically significant would be worth discussing here, but I think 10%, like more money in the bucket, and even 34% more money for the effective charity is economically significant because it can achieve so much for the recipients.
And then only one fun fact, right? Think about whether it's effective to focus on 10% and not 90%.
Right, it's not, but I have no better intervention.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And the opposition will be continued by Professor Dirk Brouwen, who's Professor of Housing and Household Finance here at Maastricht University.
Thank you. So, dear candidate, you had 6 excellent questions, I think, and also compliments from everyone around, and I can only agree, so I can be short on that. Your dissertation gave me somewhat of mixed emotions. I also got excited, like my neighbor. I think it's really nice to read every page and learn a lot from your dissertation. There's also some surprise and some disappointment in me now after this. And the disappointment is about your further research, because I spotted an opportunity that I would like you to dwell on. And that's on page 159 and 160, that's your further research. You talk about the effect of goal-directed attention and on giving, which is probably very nice, I guess, with Paul. And there's something on pension planning and AI, which probably is also very nice, but I got more excited about something else. And that has to do with figure B4. Because figure B4 is an appendix on chapter 2. You reveal then, at the end of the paper, well, to be honest, I expected a lot of people, let's say, in your sample to be giving to charity, but 40% in fact did not. Which is remarkable, because timing of your defense is really good also. Just today, in the news, in the Netherlands at least, there is this news item on the Central Bureau of Statistics that, do you know how many people are giving in the Netherlands last year to charity, percentage-wise?
I don't know.
Yes, I won't write it down, it's just a small minus point, it's fine. 75% of Dutch people, according to the Central Bureau of Statistics. But your sample has been selected by people who told that the year before at least $100 they gave to charity. Yet, in your experiment, 40% don't give at all, which is apparently more. So also this shows that we, the Dutch people, are very giving. Yeah? Contrary to our reputation, we're not stingy at all. We are giving a lot, which I'm also happy to read. So I was very curious to see 40%, but these people are not studied. So maybe I can challenge you to think about like a third further research project on analyzing these people. The 40% is a big chunk. I think they deserve some more attention. Plus, I also think if you understand these people and their motives better, and also why they don't link, let's say, to the mechanisms in your dissertation, we can have a great impact on creating a bigger pool of givers. So could you maybe start designing a research on that?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question and your intention to help my future research. Indeed, I was pretty content that 60% of the people donate. Let me explain to you why. I did at least dedicate some attention in reading why the other people were not donating. And they had very straightforward reasons. Some people said, I want to choose the charities that I donate to myself, and I'm like, that's a good attitude, and I'm just presenting them 2 charities out of 10 million charities we have on the globe. Well, that is a lot to ask from them to narrow it down to 2, and then still 60% donate. For me, that seems to be actually like a good number. And then the other reason why people were not donating is often they said like, well, I'm here doing research with you because I need the compensation. I'm struggling financially at the moment, and I also feel like, yeah, what can I respond to these kind of people to make them donate now? So in total, I was reading all these replies from people who did not donate, and I have to agree with the arguments. And then I felt again, well, it is not my job to tell people what they should have as a preference. So yeah, I think we have to accept that donations are voluntarily, and we cannot force people to donate.
True, that's also not what I was saying indeed. Because there is a descriptive analysis in chapter 2 that tells us the backgrounds of the people that do give. And also was surprised to see that the majority of those have low income.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit more complex, right? So you have responses.
Yeah.
It's a free world, people can make decisions.
Yeah.
But as an economist, I'm intrigued. So why are some people saying, no, maybe choice to, maybe that's a good answer.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you should, but it would be interesting. I would be interested to read a paper on explaining the backgrounds of people who don't, so that we know what is a sweet spot, maybe if you want to convince, maybe for charity, I think can be very effective.
Esteemed opponent, thank you so much for not letting me go that easily, because now I had a bit more time to think. And there's something else. Your keyword, like the demographics, they sparked one idea. The US is politically more divided than ever. Also economically, they are always very divided. And a lot of people also have the notion charity starts at home. That is the third major reason why people did not want to give to my global charities that do something for people far away or for climate change in general. So looking into these kind of motivation, I want to support Americans because I'm an American, like group behavior, perhaps even racial bias in donation behavior, thinking like, yeah, this goes to sub-Saharan Africa, like people have a clear idea how the people there look like, right? And of course, I find some correlation between being a Republican and to refuse to give in my experiment. And I'm collaborating with researchers in the US to work on racial bias as well. And I also want to use this data set to look into exactly these kind of political and racial biases that might exist further and try to come back with a very much better and nuanced answer to you in the future.
I look forward to that.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Assistant Professor Juan Palacios Temprano, who's working here with us at Maastricht University Real Estate Finance.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Janek, congratulations on this very fine piece of academic work. There has been a lot of compliments already, so let me congratulate you. So it's some things that you discuss in your acknowledgements. When I was a PhD student here, I also received a lot of mentorship from your two supervisors, from Paul and from Pete. And I think that you got exactly the right thing from each of them. From Paul, I also got a lot of the rigor in terms of experimental design and research design, and I remember a lot of long conversations with them. And with Pete, I got the fast decision making when time comes to make decisions and to finish things. So I think that you got the most out of them, and you actually, this is a result of the combination of the two. And I hope that you are one of many super PhD students that these two supervise from now on. Now I want to go back on chapter 2 and chapter 4, but especially on chapter 2. Let me remind you what you said in the thesis, but also on your presentation. You said that you gave participants the choice between two charities with the same cause and the same targeted population. But these two charities have very different ways to achieve those same goals on the same people. One of them is deworming pills, so keeping people alive or at least healthy, and the other one is giving people meals at the school. So having said that, then I want to go back to the point of 50-50 and the interpretation of that as fairness. What I was hoping is that the 50-50 and the claim around fairness and so forth was also around changing people from a baseline where they will not know this effectiveness. So given the differences in the way that these two charities achieve the same goal, what should be our prediction in terms of a baseline where they wouldn't know how effective these two charities are, and how would that be interpreted in pro or in con of your hypothesis? That's one question. And the second question, given that I don't think that I will have a second opportunity, just to give you some time, is you chose two charities that are very different, 100 times more effective one than the other, with very different means, as I said. So why did you pick this starking difference in treatment, in delta of this effectiveness? And wouldn't that be triggering also some extra concerns of fairness for these people that would say, well, they're in a completely different league, so let's help the small or less developed charity instead of splitting these to give everything to the one that achieves 100 times. These two, and maybe that helps also your design of the current experiments.
esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your questions. I had an answer mentally prepared for your first question, but then the second question overrode. Can you just, in one key term, remind me what was the...
So what should be our expectation in the baseline where these people receive no effectiveness?
Yes, again, I'm suffering from financial constraints not to test every possible hypothesis, and then I have to prioritize, as a donor has to prioritize as well. From the literature, I can conclude that if one charity is way more effective than the other, 40%, that's also what we find in our studies, 40% really go to the less effective one, 60% to the more effective one. Well, if there is just no difference between the charities, what other thing could we expect in randomization, right? Then people would just give 50-50. Like, in aggregate, they would give 50-50 because they have nothing to decide.
If they only care about the cost, not about the means.
Then we would simply see what intervention they prefer for emotional reasons or personal taste. I control for their subjective preferences. So every result you see has a control for really their taste in interventions. And also from seeing how the preferences about one intervention over the other is distributed also supports the notion that if it would be really randomized, like this intervention, no difference, then it should only be a difference of 10 percentage points. Now you're also asking how to address that in the future. And well, again, the idea is to broaden the scope of more interventions and to see whether it really matters, whether you compare to education charities, you compare to health charities, water, climate, and so on. And if this pattern is repeating over all these different causes, then I think we have confidence that this is the mechanism, or what would be a doubt on your side if that plays out as expected.
Yeah, just one small note. I think that you basically prime only the effectiveness, but if you also think about the similarity of the ways that these charities will have, that will be another factor that you should incorporate in the design. Because if you don't care about that, then you're assuming that people don't care about the means, but it's very different. Imagine, now this is pills, it could be also vaccines. People are anti-vaccines. People might actually feel that all else equal, I don't want to give into anything that will give medicine or vaccines to people. So
let me make two more additions to your questions. Yes, I totally agree. You highlight the big difference, 1 to 100. That's huge. In the future studies, we also abstain from that. We also check what happens if we simply say one charity is recommended, the other one is not. Like not having it quantified with this huge margin, but just qualitatively to see how would that affect the results. Well, we have to see that. So that's an empirical question. I'm on it to answer that question. And the other aspect that you're highlighting is the personal taste. And that is also something where we are blessed as experimental economists, because if randomization works well, then the treatment control comparison should really give us the answer, right? So if randomization works into the different interventions that we now compare next to each other, then experimental methodology should exactly tackle the critique that you're asking.
And we'll move to the opposition now. We continue again. Professor Peter Werner.
Thank you. So I would like to ask a question regarding chapter 3, and but also a more general question regarding this cost effectiveness, right? So in chapter 3, you find that people respond to cost information, in particular to relative cost information. But I was wondering, cost effectiveness might refer to very different dimensions, right? So charities differ a lot. For instance, by the impact, right? Different criteria to measure costs. There are different ways to measure impact. So my question in general would be, what what structure or what characteristics of how we measure costs, how we measure impact, let's say, can we use to make sure that potential donor actually get the correct information about effectiveness that they need to make a proper decision.
Yeah. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. To some extent, I have to disappoint you that the cost effectiveness calculations are not provided by myself, but basically delivered to the donor by me. But of course, as the person who delivers that, I have to make sure that the information is sound. And we as a whole team in the last week spent like a lot of hours checking the evaluators on how they evaluate. And what we see is that, and that also answers why I chose this charity in the first place. That's one of the few examples.
What?
Janek Kretschmer, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now stay in the room to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and the company today await the results of our deliberations, and if you would be so kind as to leave the room and we will deliberate. Thank you.
Okay. Will you follow me, please? And then the audience. No. kunt wel plaatsnemen.
Janek Kretschmer, the degree committee will present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defence. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. The degree committee, led by Professor Eichholz, is authorised to confirm upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Wilt u gaan staan?
Zo. Okay. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible?
I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Janek Kretschmer, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university. Yes, yes. Here we go, Janek. Yeah, we should open it. Right? Let me open.
You go forward here. And we cannot take a nice picture.
This is the moment to freeze, folks.
You are in the
Janek,
middle. No.
So you hold it? Yeah.
U kunt wel plaatsen.
Do you have enough pictures?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Janek, it's yours now.
Ja, mag ik even de paren en even het diploma vasthouden?
Heel even.
Prima.
Dear Dr. Kretschmer, also on behalf of Maastricht University, congratulate you with the degree that you've acquired. The floor will go to your supervisor, Professor Smeets, to give the audition.
Yeah, so also congratulations from me, Janek, or I should now say Dr. Kretschmer, and to the family, to the friends, to the colleagues. I'm really proud, and Pete too. So I was really enjoying the defense, but I will get into that more. But when I was thinking, like, okay, what is this speech? What is the context of the speech? I realized this is actually the second time that I give a speech for Janek, because the first time was at his wedding. Mm-hmm. And I thought, yeah, Janek is kind of a homo economicus, right? We just learned for 1 hour about the rationality behind his decisions. So I thought he must believe that I will do another good job to do it again. So he must expect a positive expected return from this speech. But I hope at least that the return from this speech is a bit a longer run return than from my previous.
Did the incentives change between the 2 points in time?
So now we get into a conversation. This is very interesting. This is normally not how the laudatio will go. we will get to that during the drinks, because I want to come back to the idea of the homo economicus, the Janek cost-benefit analysis. Because you started also during your speech today, and my head is falling off because it's too big for my head. That for $5 you can buy a Starbucks coffee, or you can, according to some charities, save a life, which of course is misleading information. That's why people have this wrong idea that it's so cheap to save a life. But I know Janek also as somebody who doesn't waste money on those things. Where I sometimes go to buy these really expensive coffees. Janek would not do that. And he would also not give in to pressure to donate to something that is not very rational. And that I think really makes Janek somebody who makes maximizing the utility as really an art form. And not just in his research, but as well in what he does privately. And I really like this following quote of how I think you really see the homo economicus in his life. He told me recently, it's not so hard to become rich. And I really liked that because it really shows that Janek thinks that there is a rationality, and now he learned a lot about that when he joined finance. The finance department. In the beginning, it was like, oh, should I teach finance? I don't know whether I like it. But then he fully got all of the benefits out of it and just applied all the knowledge from finance to his personal life. Now I'm going to get rid of this because it's just and not only like in the stock market, but also exploiting differences between betting markets in different countries and using the arbitrage as I teach them to my finance students in the introductory finance class. So that is really, I think, a very nice way of using the rationality of what you learn in practice. And that's also what he does with his dissertation, because the results of the dissertation are not only academically interesting, as we heard from several committee members like Tobias. In every page, people were thinking, oh, what does this all imply? So that means it's academically challenging, it's new, it's creative, but it's also highly relevant. Bram Schaper is here today, the director of Données Effectief. They are already directly using the results of Janek's dissertation. And many more organizations giving what we can, Effectief Spenden in Germany. And that is often not the case with PhD dissertation. Very often it's academically interesting, but here really this direct application, I think that's something that is really outstanding in the work, and there's only more to come. For example, a field experiment we are currently running with Données Effectief to put all these lab studies really into practice. And there is so much more to come in that sense, but I want to say also something about Janek's personality, because as a supervisor, it has been really nice to work with Janek, because what I think is very special about Janek, he's very honest, direct, and he's very clear about his intentions. So you never have to guess what is behind his actions. There's no second order beliefs. We talked about beliefs today. He's just open and transparent, and if he doesn't like it, he will say it too. So that's very much how the Dutch people like it as well, and that makes it a nice way to work together. And that has led to many inspiring conversations that we had that were not just about science. There was a lot of discussions about that too, but also about a private life. But I think the key really about what has happened in these last 2 years, where there was a huge learning curve for Janek, was also when he presented in front of John List, Professor John List of the University of Chicago, at a really important charitable giving conference. And those of you who don't know John List, it's like you're playing the guitar and you can play in front of Jimi Hendrix or Mark Knopfler or Carlos Santana. That's really what it means if you present your research on charitable giving in front of John List. And John List was also interested, was also intrigued, asked questions. So that just demonstrates what your work has done. So I'm looking forward just to a whole lot more cooperation. You now have joined here in Maastricht with Thomas Post, where you can really work more on your love that you have developed for finance, behavioral finance, and to do great work there. And also, yeah, we are going to work together. We have 3 wonderful chapters that we are now going to take, and you explained today all the new stuff we are going to do, and I'm super excited about that. But the way I see it, your journey really has just begun. Your academic journey, you started this year with going to conferences. There is way more to come, and I just hope that on that road you will be just as impactful as what you have done until now. Janek, congratulations.
much, and we'd like to welcome all the family, of course, to the Refte, where we're going to have drinks, and then there'll be some photos first of all on the stairs. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Kretschmer.
Oh, thank you. Congratulations. Yeah, well, yeah.